What is up, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are speaking about the 2016 disappearance of 16-year-old Lashaya Stine, who vanished from Aurora, Colorado. And this is one that everybody needs to share, everyone needs to be aware of, because there is a really large chance, and it's one of the widest believed theories, that Lashaya was actually put into trafficking, that she was taken and she was drugged and forced into sex work. And there is plenty of evidence to suggest this. This is in fact a theory that authorities have been looking into themselves, so this isn't just like a random internet theory. When it comes to situations like this, people that are sex trafficked or just trafficked for whatever reason, they're not always kept in the dark forever. These people are out on the city streets. They are possibly helping to lure in other victims for whoever's trafficking them. They are being posted about somewhere sometimes. So it's very important for you guys to see her picture, understand what happened to her and where she might be, because the last thing that her family and authorities need is for her face and her story to kind of fade out of focus. Now, there has been activity in this case within the past 3 months, which is awesome, but I want to kind of help keep that up and help have a permanent space for her on the internet where stories being told. So Lashaya was 16 years old. Like I said, she was living in Aurora, Colorado with her family when she disappeared on July 15th, 2016. Lashaya absolutely loved her family. She was really close to her siblings. She was really close to her mom, and everyone that knew her described her as a very kind and incredibly intelligent and driven young woman. She always did very well in school, and at the time of her disappearance, she was attending George Washington High School as an honor roll student, and she even was set to graduate early, which she was very excited and worked very hard for, and she even had huge plans after graduation. Lashaya's dream was to become a nurse, and she worked very hard to ensure she achieved those goals. And she'd even just landed an internship at University Hospital that was supposed to start just within days of her disappearance. But she wasn't just tackling school and this internship. She also had a job interview the day that she went missing. So this is a girl who was always on the move. She was always making plans. She was going places. But Lashaya also, according to her family, could be very naive. And I feel like as a teenager, especially that age, we all have been in that spot. You know, we've all been naive to certain things. And it seems like she suffered from that just like most young teens do, where she kind of wanted to see the best of the world. And she looked at things through rose-colored glasses, and she wanted to go out to parties, and she wanted to have fun with her friends and do these things. And she wasn't quite understanding the realities of the dangers behind them. Like, she would frequently ask her mom to go out to a party at night where no parents were going to be there, and we've all been there and done that. Typically, nothing ever good happens at those parties. So her mom made it a huge point to kind of push her in the right direction and say, you know, these are the dangers that could happen. Be responsible. You've got so much life to live. You've got so many good things that you're doing. Keep your eye on your goal and keep pushing towards that. But she wasn't totally being held back from doing things average teenagers do. It's just those few things where she could potentially be putting herself at risk, not understanding the dangers of those situations. And on top of that, there are some areas in Aurora that are known for gangs, that are known for forced sex work, that are known for drugs, and it's just a lot of things that a young 16-year-old girl could unfortunately fall victim to, especially when you are seeing the world in a certain way that it isn't always. I hope that makes any sense. She was just someone that could easily be manipulated, and she could be told anything and believe it. And unfortunately, this is likely how someone was able to lure her from her home in the middle of the night on July 15th, 2016. So that particular night, her whole family had stayed up together. They were hanging out, and they all settled into bed sometime between, I believe, like 1:30 to 2, possibly as late as 2:30 in the morning. I think that's a little bit late, but somewhere in that time frame. And Lashaya and her mom were very excited because the next day at 1 o'clock, she was supposed to have an interview at a local firehouse subs. And I think this was her first job, so that's kind of a big deal. And she was really nervous, but really excited. They had driven around to go and find it, so they were prepared to get there on time and everything. So the next morning, Lashaya's mom, Sabrina, was texting her to make sure, you know, are you up and at 'em? Are you getting yourself together? Are you preparing for your interview? But Lashaya was not texting her back. So after a while of silence from Lashaya, Sabrina decided to call her oldest son, which was Lashaya's older brother, to go ahead and knock on Lashaya's door, get her out of bed, and get her going. But he said that she was not in her room. They checked the entire house, top to bottom, and there was no sign of Lashaya. At this point, Lashaya's mom started to panic because this was very out of character for her. She was like a very type A kind of person where she did the same things. She was very close to her family. She didn't go anywhere without saying anything. Typically, there is one exception that I'll get into. So this wasn't normal. And she began to call her repeatedly, and Lashaya wasn't answering the phone. It was ringing, but she wasn't answering until about the third or fourth call when Lashaya's phone was going straight to voicemail, indicating that it more than likely had been turned off, which again just added to the suspicion. At some point relatively close to this occurrence, there had actually been another time where Lashaya could not be accounted for. And this was the only other time that her mom remembers because typically you could always rely on her being where she said she is. During this other incident, they also could not find Lashaya. She was supposed to be home and she wasn't. So they went out looking in the neighborhood, and after about 20 minutes, they were able to locate her. Now, I don't know if they ever got any answers as to where she was or why she left without saying anything, but they were kind of hoping that this was the same situation, that maybe she just went out again to walk around and didn't say anything, but after searching and searching and searching, they still couldn't locate her. At this point, Sabrina decided to call Aurora Police Department and report Lashaya as missing. Didn't do much at first. When Sabrina called and explained the situation, they said that they believed it was more likely Lashaya was a runaway and that she would eventually return home. And so they would take the missing persons report over the phone, but no one was going to immediately come out. They would just send someone whenever they had a chance to check out the situation. So this essentially left Lashaya's family on their own to try to locate her with minimal resources. The first thing they decided to do was just log on to Google and see if they could find her phone. And for those of you that are not aware, and if you're ever in a situation like this, if someone has their Google locations turned on, you usually can see where the phone is located and like a history. It's almost like Find My iPhone, but it's more of like a log from my understanding and the few times that I've seen it, but that was years ago when I was looking into a case, so it may have changed at this point. But they basically wanted to look and see if they could locate her that way. Now, while they were able to log on and look at, that her phone had been turned on and then turned off, they were not able to see her location, so this gave them no information. So they decided from this point to just look into the rest of her phone. They checked out her call logs. They, jotted down all the different numbers that she had been calling, any suspicious numbers that they saw, any incoming, traffic through text messages, anything they could. They were calling numbers that they didn't recognize to see if maybe within those there was some sort of answer, but unfortunately they just weren't getting anything. So they also logged on to her social media, everything from Snapchat to Instagram, Facebook, I'm sure, and they were trying to see if there was any answers hidden there, but they didn't find anything to indicate that she was planning on going to meet anyone that night, or that she was even currently active on social media, which did kind of make sense because her phone was turned off. But this was also just unlike her. So after a few hours of being out on foot and friends and family coming to try to locate Lashaya, authorities finally showed up at their home. And they wanted to take a look at Lashaya's room and ask her mom a few questions. And this ended up leading to some very important pieces of information. Lashaya had not taken any personal belongings with her. She didn't take any extra clothes. Every single thing could be accounted for. She didn't take her wallet. She didn't take any money. And she didn't even take her phone charger. So this kind of indicated that if she did leave to go somewhere on her own, she was intending on coming back. Plus, she had her internship that was coming up. She also had her job interview the next day. There was no way she wasn't going to come home unless something had happened. We also noticed that Lashaya's window was unlocked in her bedroom. From my understanding, Lashaya, again, her bedroom was on the basement level of the home. This is a very typical setup for a home in Colorado. And if you also are familiar with basements and typically also living situations in basements, there's always a special sort of window that leads to the ground level outside. It's there, first of all, for like ventilation, sunlight, things like that, but also in case you need to get in or out It's just a safety measure. Lashaya's window had a pretty heavy grate on top of it, and then there was a potted plant that typically sat on top of that. Now, while the window was unlocked, I believe the grate was still in place, but the plant had been moved to the side. Because of this, it was believed that Lashaya had likely, in fact, left on her own accord, that at some point she decided that night that she was going to sneak out. And Lashaya's mom said she believed that the plant being moved to the side possibly indicated that Lashaya had, in fact, tried to come home that night. Maybe the grate was too heavy to lift. Maybe for some reason she just couldn't get in and out of her, get in her window, that something happened, and for whatever reason she couldn't get back in. So she just decided to either go back to where she was or go somewhere else. But authorities weren't really on board with this idea at first. They still said that because of the state of the room and everything surrounding, her disappearance, that she likely was still a runaway. So that's how they treated it for about a week. So again, the family was kind of left alone to deal with the situation. They put out flyers. They were provided those, which is absolutely awesome. If this again ever happens to you, look out for local resources, different foundations that will help you get that sort of aid without having to necessarily get it directly from authorities or having to worry about the money that it may take you to print off that many. They also went around questioning individuals. They were taking in their own tips. They were following their own leads, all on their own. The whole entire time, Lashaya didn't touch her social media. Lashaya never showed up back at home. Her phone was never turned back on. There was no trace of her. And at this point, everyone knew she did not run away. And then the police chief ended up showing up at the family home about a week after Lashaya was reported missing. And he actually kind of apologized. He said that during that entire week, he was on vacation. And when he got back and saw Lashaya's file, he was not very happy with how it had been handled so far. It was very clear to him that something was wrong and it should have been acted on way quicker. So they hit the ground running at that point.
It was actually showing the hours right after 16-year-old Lashaya Stine leaves home and disappears. Take a look. She went missing in mid-July, and Aurora police say she may be in danger. Her mother sat down with Denver 7's Sally Mamdou, a story you will only see on Denver 7. Sally?
Yeah, Shannon, her mother is just hoping that every day will be the day she returns. Today, with video being released and her speaking out, she's only hoping it will all help her reunite with her daughter.
For 16 days, Sabrina Jones has been glued to her phone.
I just keep thinking that Lashaya is going to try to call me.
But so far, it has been this.
At the tone, please record your voice message.
Every time Sabrina has tried to reach her missing 16-year-old daughter, Lashaya Stine.
None of this makes sense to me.
Aurora police just released surveillance video showcasing the teen at this intersection walking by herself during early morning hours before crossing the road and disappearing into thin air.
Even though she did leave at 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't think she meant to stay gone.
Because of the clues Sabrina found in her daughter's room. Sabrina says Lashaya didn't take her phone charger, pack any clothes, or take her wallet. Sabrina says her honors student daughter was supposed to start her internship today.
She had an internship at University Hospital for the next 5 days. She wouldn't have missed it for the world. She was so excited.
All reasons causing her to believe her daughter is not safe.
I am so sick. Some days I don't even want to get out of the bed. And then there's been days that I hope I don't even wake up because no parent should feel this.
And tonight she's hoping she could get through to her.
Please, mamas, please, baby girl. We can work through it. Whatever it is, we'll get through it.
That night, they put a plea out to the public for anyone to bring forward any information that they may have on Lashaya's disappearance. And they also decided to release a pretty huge piece of evidence to not just the public for the first time, but the family as well. Lashaya had been captured on security footage. So it was right around 2:45 a.m. that she was captured, which was literally right after her family went to bed. So pretty much the second everyone fell asleep, Lashaya left the house. And the area she was seen was only about, I think, less than a mile from her home. It was not far at all. And it was at the intersection of East Montview Boulevard and Peoria Street. So in the footage, you see her walking by herself. She seems on a mission, like she knows exactly where she's going, and she's walking along the sidewalk. And you can tell there's a car going the opposite direction. They're stopped at a stoplight, from my understanding. That's just kind of the way it all looks. And she kind of looks back like she sees the car and is checking for cars to be coming, and then she crosses the street. From the clip and from what a lot of people have stated, they believe it's very possible that she went to go get in this car, or, that she was waiting for someone to pick her up potentially. But from what I'm seeing and just the clip that's available to me, which obviously is not the entire thing, it seems more like she was, just crossing the street and heading down the same direction she was going. But who knows? That's just kind of what I gathered from it. But this was a huge deal because authorities captured her. They knew the direction she was heading in that night. They were able to get a time, which was very important. And they were able to hope that someone in the area either had other footage from maybe a Ring doorbell, or possibly the person that had been driving that car that saw her. Maybe someone knew or had some sort of footage further along the way to see where she continued going or where she may have ended up. Tips began to pour in. And this is very common, especially when you release something like footage. However, the tips that were coming in were bone-chilling, in my opinion, because usually when tips are called in, you're getting all sorts of information, theories left and right. A lot of them don't kind of connect, but it seemed like every single person calling in was claiming that Lashaya had been taken by a man, one particular man. She was being drugged and she was forced into sex trafficking. Now, at the time that all these tips were coming in, they were definitely coming in at a pace, and, with so many of them, that this was probably a possibility that they needed to look into. But also being a 16-year-old girl, honor roll student, she kind of kept to herself and her small circle of friends. They wanted to make sure they checked the more likely scenarios out, which was that small bubble, because it just seemed almost like unfathomable that someone like Lashaya could somehow end up involved with someone that was able to get her into sex trafficking. So they didn't totally push it out of their minds. They just wanted to look at these other possibilities first. And this led them to her ex-boyfriend. Now, this is a lot of gray area in this case, which is kind of frustrating because of information that I know about more recent searches. But apparently, no one really knows what their relationship was like in the slightest. According to Lashaya's mom, this was a young boy that just would occasionally come over and hang out with Lashaya and see her at their house, and then she would stop talking about him like they weren't together anymore, and he was never introduced as a boyfriend. It was always he's a friend, and then he popped back up again, but then some of the friends said that they were dating, but then some said they didn't. And then I think even his father was questioned when original searches were happening, and this boy's father didn't even know Lashaya. He did say that he spoke to his son at one point, and his son said that, yeah, he knew her, but they weren't dating. So basically, you're getting the idea here. It was like a very typical teenage relationship where no one knows what's happening. But they wanted to make sure that he was ruled out, that Lashaya was with him for some reason, hiding with him, or that maybe something had happened. So they did bring this boy in. They questioned him. They even checked his cell phone all the way down to his cell phone records. So even if something was deleted, they had evidence of it. And they found that he had absolutely no communication with Lashaya at all, at least the entire week prior to her disappearance. So had she been leaving her house to go and see him, there was no evidence that they ever communicated that or that it was ever a plan. They hadn't even been speaking to each other. So then they moved on to Lashaya's friends. They spoke to them. None of them had heard from Lashaya at all since she vanished. So this wasn't adding up because clearly Lashaya had left her house to meet someone. Her mom knew about all of her friends, knew about this ex-boyfriend or just guy she was really close with, and none of them had answers. There also were no strange numbers in her phone. There were no strange people she was in contact with over social media. So who on earth did she meet where it left absolutely no trace at all? So this is when a few of Lashaya's secrets kind of started to come out. And I don't know a whole lot about this. Sabrina was interviewed by Marissa from the Vanish podcast, and that's where I got this information. And Sabrina doesn't speak about it very much, so I'm assuming it, didn't account for much when authorities looked into it. But I guess police were bringing Sabrina photos and names of other young girls Lashaya's age, young boys Lashaya's age, even some older men, all that somehow knew Lashaya, but her family had never heard of. It was people Lashaya had never mentioned before, people that had never been to her house, people that didn't even go to her high school. And then also, how on earth did she meet these older men? So it was kind of shocking and made this situation that much scarier because it showed there was some secret aspect of Lashaya's life that she kept to herself. But who may have been in that secret life that had bad intentions and could possibly be responsible for her disappearance? And this is when a lot of focus really shifted to the potential of trafficking, and a lot of the tips began to make sense. Like I said, so many of the tips suggested that a specific man had taken Lashaya and put her in sex trafficking, which started to line up with the other tips they received that Lashaya was being seen at random parties in the middle of the night. She was being seen at bus stops in the middle of the night and other hours of the day. She was seen, in very questionable places around town and kind of sketchy motels. Many people also just specifically said she was with an older man and another young female, which again is something that you commonly see with trafficking. So traffickers approach these kinds of situations very methodically, and there are definitely a few ways they get their victims and gain their trust that are very well known. Now, Lashaya easily could have been an easy target according to what her family said, that she was very naive and clearly she was up to having a good time and she would believe anything anyone said to her. She clearly, according to authorities, also had friends that she was hiding from her family. And the first thing that tells me is that there was some reason she didn't want to introduce these people to her mom or have her know about them. And it's probably because there was something about them her mom would not approve of, which obviously makes you question, what were they doing? What would her mom not approve of? Who could she have met through this group of friends? And how did she meet them even to begin with? Clearly she didn't want these friends to be known by her family because there was something there that her family wouldn't approve of. And that just gets my mind going. These traffickers find their victims and then they play a game. Sometimes they send in someone that's relatable. So if they want a teen girl as their next victim, as their target, they will send in a teen girl that they already have full control over. It's someone that other teen can relate to. If it's, a female that clearly wants the attention of a man, they send a man in. It's just, there's so many, they just cater to these situations perfectly. They slowly get to know you, understand everything about you in your life. They find your weaknesses. They start to isolate you. Sometimes they'll turn you on even your own family, on your own friends. One by one, they just push everyone in your life away from you so they can isolate you and take you a lot easier. They usually also are able to accomplish all of this without people knowing because they make extravagant promises. They tell you that they're going to give you all of your hopes and dreams, that they'll, they have contacts, people who will help you get into a certain field you want to get into, or you want to be a musician or you want to be a singer. I've got contacts in Hollywood. They'll promise you cars. They'll promise you jewelry, anything that you desire. They act like they can get it for you. And that can become a very blinding thing for people. They find out about your family. They find out about what would destroy you. And then they take all of this information and they take you down with it. They're also typically smart enough to avoid leaving any sort of trace behind. So if trafficking is what's happening here, this is likely why not a single thing was found on her phone. I'm sure that these people are always on the watch. They probably knew where Lashaya was at all times. They would make sure that when they did speak to her, it was a situation where it was in person. It was never over a phone. I'm sure they made excuses saying, oh, I left my phone here or there. Oh, I don't give my phone number out, or a million different things to make her feel more comfortable with it. There possibly could have been a specific set time or day that she would meet them in person. And I honestly wonder if that's what happened the day that she wandered off, where she was found 20 minutes later. I wonder if that time and then the night she disappeared, if that, those weren't the first times that she had actually left the house without anyone knowing. So because this would explain a lot, authorities dove headfirst into this idea. When authorities went to the different individuals who would call in with these tips that there's this very specific man with Lashaya to try to figure out what his name was, because it seemed obvious they all knew it, everyone shut down. No one wanted to give up this man, which even further indicated this guy has some sort of power, whether he's a trafficker, whether he's involved in drugs in the area, possibly he's in a gang. There's some situation to where he's got power over people to where they're so scared they will not name him. Authorities pushed and pushed, and so did Lashaya's family, but unfortunately, they were never really able to get his name. And then after about 3 months of desperately looking for Lashaya, all the tips stopped as well. This was baffling to authorities and Lashaya's family because they went from having numerous calls a day. I mean, Lashaya's family was getting separate phone calls, the authorities were getting phone calls, to pretty much none for 4 whole months after that. And that is not a typical thing. You don't typically see that. Things will trickle down, but never to that extent. And then just as quick as everything stopped, all the tips started again. They began to flood in, and it was the same kinds of tips that Lashaya was at a bus stop, Lashaya's at a party, I saw Lashaya with this man. This just further made trafficking click even more. The trafficker likely felt compromised, like authorities were getting too close, so they moved out of state, because what better way to escape an investigating agency than crossing state lines to where the federal agencies would have to get involved? It basically is like jumping a creek and the dogs, getting off your scent. The tips that were coming in when they started flooding in again also kind of corroborated the idea that trafficking was involved, because these people were saying she was temporarily taken to Kansas, that she was taken across state lines, that she was in other areas of Colorado, and that she had been brought back and was now back in Aurora. I mean, there were people that said she had been to Missouri, that she had been taken to Nevada, she was in New Mexico, just all over the place. And I don't think tips like this had been said when she initially went missing. It was after that big gap of time. It was just a wild goose chase for authorities. And then they got something that seemed like a big break. The family did. A local pimp ended up making an offer to the family to keep an eye out for Lashaya. This pimp said that he had already seen her a handful of times. He was aware of who she was with, that she was with a very dangerous man, and that when he saw her next, he would alert the family, who would then alert authorities, and hopefully she would be captured and taken back home. This pimp said that Lashaya was always being watched, that this girl did not even have a second to herself, likely because her investigation was so active. And these people obviously didn't want to be caught, so they were looking for any strange movement to be able to snatch her up and run away with her again. But before this pimp even saw Lashaya again and was able to report anything, another huge tip came in that no one was really expecting, but again, just supports this theory. Someone at the 7-star Motel in Aurora, which apparently is known to be a frequent spot for pimps, called Lashaya's family and said that they were positive they had seen Lashaya. There's one very recognizable physical feature on Lashaya that a lot of people are looking out for. When she was young, she had some sort of sting, something stung her on her chest, and it got infected and it healed very oddly, so she has a quarter-sized scar on her chest, dead center, like about right here from my understanding, and this person knew the scar. They were like, I saw her, I saw the scar, I know this is your daughter, come and get her. Here's the motel room, you need to come and get her. So Lashaya's family then called authorities, who immediately were sent out to the scene. Lashaya's family went as well, obviously staying back because they wanted to monitor everything. They wanted to see if they could see her for herself. They weren't compromising anything by any means. They were just there as another set of eyes and to be there for Lashaya in case it really was her. But when authorities got there and burst into the room, whoever had been there had already left. It was clear someone was there at some point because there were even bags of girls' clothing scattered around the room and the drawers and the corners, and it was devastating. I don't know if authorities took any of that clothing to test it and see if, any DNA on it came back as matching Lashaya, so they could at least solidify this idea that she is absolutely being bounced around. in trafficking. I don't know if they ever got any information when it comes to the name that the room was under. I'm sure even if there was a name on it, if it did have anything to do with trafficking, it was a fake one, so I doubt it would have gotten them far anyways. But I just have so many questions revolving around this one occurrence. And even more upsetting, after all of this happened, there were residents that stayed in the motel, and they all said that they watched all this go down and that authorities showed up 5 minutes too late. That somehow the people in charge, the traffickers, they knew authorities were coming and they got her out. They moved her to a hotel or a motel across the street, and then a few minutes later threw her into a dark SUV and took off with her. So, I mean, either this is a bunch of people just going along with this very elaborate story, or it's like chasing a ghost. Like, she just keeps getting swept away right when her family and authorities get close and almost get her. And I can't even imagine, as a mother myself, that sort of feeling, you guys, and having to sit and just wait in front of a motel where some strange men could be just selling your daughter. I just am heartbroken for her family. I am heartbroken for her mom. And this is why trafficking scares me so much. It's like, because even sometimes when you try your hardest to save someone, these people just have eyes and ears everywhere, and so quickly they can run. But as if that's not enough to really show the reality of what is happening in this disappearance, there's another blow. A young girl showed up to a local outreach center in Aurora that is basically there to take in young women and young girls that are trying to get off the streets. And one day, this teenage girl walked in and said she needed help, that she needed to get off the streets, that she was being trafficked and she had escaped. And she directly said, a man was trafficking me and he was trafficking me with Lashaya. So one girl managed to escape and specifically said that she had been with Lashaya, that she was being trafficked. She mentioned Lashaya's name. And she even went further, saying that Lashaya said she wanted to come home, that she wanted to leave. She wanted to be out of it. But the very scary and unfortunate thing when it comes to these situations is that these individuals are not all, like, they're forced, they're manipulated to stay in these situations. Traffickers are so smart and mentally manipulate these people. They brainwash them. They make them believe that their families would never have them back, that their families would be so ashamed that it's not worth going home. You know, they tell them that they'll never get a job or live a normal life again. That they have no home to go back to when they leave. It's part of that isolation. They tell these individuals these things so often that they believe it, that they believe that if, despite the fact that it is not their fault that they were put into this trafficking situation, that their family will hate them for what they were doing. And it's just sick and it's messed up. And drugs are used as well sometimes, but it doesn't always take these physical things like handcuffs and locked rooms and drugs to keep someone in control. The mental aspect of it is what you hear everyone tell their stories about. It's the mental aspect of feeling like no one will love you after this and no one will care about you and no one will accept you as who you are anymore. That's a lot of the reason why these women don't end up escaping. They feel like at this point, this is the only life they'll ever have to live. Sightings continued for a bit after the motel incident. There were people claiming that they had seen Lashaya all up and down Colfax Avenue in Aurora, but just as they had before, the sightings slowed down again. It's very likely that she had been taken out of state. The tips that were brought in were to those same few places that I mentioned previously. Authorities had, in fact, at this point brought in the FBI. They were working with numerous different law enforcement agencies across the board. Every time someone said that they saw her, it was checked out. Every single lead has been chased down until it has been disproven or they just cannot chase it any longer. For a few years, things were quiet up until a couple of months ago. So back in November, some pretty big movement happened in the case, but I think it has a lot of people, especially me, scratching our heads. Authorities just randomly showed up on scene one day at a house. It's a vacant home at 2200 Lansing Street in Aurora. So the searches for Lashaya had not been in Aurora for a pretty long time. This was kind of the first time it was coming back home for everyone. And this house was a huge interest of authorities, obviously. Now, when they first went to this home, they explained that Lashaya had known someone that lived in the home back when she disappeared, and that after those people moved out, another family moved in, and they basically had to wait for that lease to be up to go in and search the way they wanted to. And they also explained that they had received numerous tips recently that led them to really want to thoroughly search this house, but they didn't say a lot about it. They did not give a lot of information, and it seems like even Lashaya's family was not really aware that this search was about to happen, based on a statement that they made, I think like a day or two into the search.
Wilkins was helping her sister look for a new place, and they were walking around this property the summer of 2016 when she smelled something unusual.
It was a eerie, nasty smell. It was just really all over in the air, and it just, it had a stench that's unexplainable.
More than 4 years later, a much more sensitive nose is trying to find something to explain, according to Officer Matthew Longshore.
We follow up on all the leads.
Longshore says Lashaya knew someone who lived here at the time, and investigators got a tip to check this place out. But officers had to wait to do the search because somebody new lived here after 2016.
The people that were living in here last weren't involved in the case, and so we had to wait until they left.
Longshore says it's possible the dogs are looking for a body.
Cadaver dogs came in on the first day, local police were there, the FBI were there, and then on the third day of the search, things got a bit intense. Aurora Fire Department was on scene with jackhammers, things to cut concrete, huge pieces of machinery. And it was clear, based on, where lights and things were on in the house, that they were in the basement. They were basically busting apart all of the concrete. Now, there were tables in the back where they had large slabs of concrete set out. They were clearly sifting through the concrete. And at one point during that day, a black car showed up, backed into the garage door shut. And then after a few moments, it was open and the car left. So clearly some bit of evidence was put into that vehicle, and they didn't want anyone to know what it was. They were very, very secretive about whatever they were doing in the home. Now, they did send out a public relations officer later on in the day, and it was announced that at this home, 2200 Lansing Street, that they found some sort of evidence that led them to search in a specific area.
Police confirmed they called in the Aurora Fire Department to operate equipment used to break up concrete.
So that stuff was used for concrete, so there's some areas maybe in the basement that we were trying to focus on today.
Investigative leads and tips led them to this address. This is now the third day we've noticed police here, and the FBI is assisting with the investigation.
And there had to be a reason they were digging the basement.
Her family said in a statement earlier this week they remain hopeful she will be found and brought home. That's what neighbors are hoping too.
And praying for her family that they find some answers soon, because it's been too long. And I think our whole neighborhood, the community, would like some answers.
Now, I do not know the truth to this, so please take this with a grain of salt. I have only seen it on one article that is linked down in my sources down below, but I have seen that this house is where her ex-boyfriend lived. Now, again, I don't know the truth to that. I have not seen it on a ton of different sources. I don't know if this was just accidentally slipped or what the situation is, but that would kind of be an interesting turn if that's what's really going on here. They took multiple 5-gallon buckets and shovels and things out of the house. Tons of concrete was taken from the home, and authorities said that everything was being sent for forensic testing, and they were going to see if any of the evidence they found was in any way directly related to Lashaya's case. It's been a couple of months now. They have not released anything. I know that it can take quite a while for forensic evidence to be tested and for everything to come back. And even if they do have the results, they're not always going to give it to the public. Given the fact that this case has gone the way it has, I would totally understand if authorities wanted to protect the integrity of the case by not releasing anything. But I do find it very, very interesting that the theory that's kind of going with this case doesn't necessarily match up to the house that they searched recently. So I'm interested to see what happens in regards to that. I'm interested to see if Lashaya's family finally gets some sort of answers here. But my biggest hope is that they're able to find her and bring her back to her family. There is just such a huge chance, based on all of the evidence that they have so far, based on the absurd amount of tips and close calls, that she is in fact out there. Lashaya was about 150 pounds when she went missing. It is likely that at this point she's lost 20 to 30, possibly even more pounds since this happened. There have been a couple reports that she may or may not be wearing a wig now. I've seen some things suggesting she could be going by a different name. However, a lot of the different individuals that have spoken to the family have stated that Lashaya is the name she's been introduced by since they've seen her while she's been trafficked. So again, the biggest identifying factor could be that scar that is on her chest. There's just no telling, stuff like this makes me so upset because so many people could possibly see this young girl. Someone could have seen her today and they just don't know. They just don't know her and they don't know her story and they haven't seen her picture and they don't know she needs help. And that's why covering stories like this and sharing these sorts of things all across social media is so important, because that could make all of the difference. Someone that watches this video, or, if you guys share her missing persons poster or what her age progression, most recent one, looks like, that could make the difference between her remaining in trafficking and her being rescued. So let me know what you guys think down below. So please, please, please share this video, share her missing persons poster. There's an age progression that's out there. I believe for 19 is the most recent that's been done. So absolutely share this and share her story. I know there are those locations that I've already put out there, Missouri, New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, but there are possibly other states all along that area that she could be in as well. So everyone that you can possibly share this information to, share it to. But that is all that I have for you guys today. I want to thank you so much for listening to Lashaya's story and helping to spread it so hopefully she can be brought home to her family. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Howland fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.